In this tutorial we'll look in detail about how to import files of various types into Mistica. In the most part the files we want to import will be either movie files, audio files or image files. And in each of those cases we use the Import tab here to navigate our way to the files that we want, and then for Mistica to create a link to those files so that we can use them on our timeline. So the first thing to do is to navigate to where we want to be. We can type in a destination here, or of course use the navigation aids here to find our way around our system or our network. Mistica can access files from any file system that the host operating system can see, so that might be your entire facility network. So in this case I'm just finding my way into a folder where I know I have some sample movies I'd like to use. Now, as you can see, in this particular scenario I've had to go through quite a few folders to get to where I want to be. I have a little trick I use if I know I'm going to keep going back to the same directories. Although the Import tab will stay where you left it, between Mistica sessions or other navigation moves, it might be that you're continuously having to go back through quite a deep directory structure to get back to files that you're commonly trying to access. But it's possible to use the operating system to give us some shortcuts. So for example, I'll open two windows just from the operating systems, and one of them is where my project resides. So you can see the standard directory layout that Mistica has created. The other one is actually where my target directory resides. So in this case, these are the folders that I know that I'm going to routinely want to access. So in which case I'm just going to take the parent folder and drag it to the project directory, but I'm not going to move it, I'm going to press link here. So what that will do is create a fake directory, if you like, that simply points to this one. So now when I go back to my project, all I have to do is press home, and you can see in here I now have import files, so I can get directly to those files that I wanted to look at. Of course you don't have to do that, you can just load your material directly from any path you can access, but this is just a shortcut to make a folder that you're regularly accessing easier to get at. So back to importing. So I have some general movies in here, and as you can see, if I single click on any movie, I can preview them by dragging up and down in the source monitor. That's even true for image sequences as well. For example, in here, here's some EXR sequences. I can just select any one of them, and if Mistica senses that there's a sequence there, which it will do from the continual numbers, then I can drag through it to see what the media is. I can also see other things. For example, in this case, this will have an alpha channel, so I can see the alpha channel is intact on those files too. To import a single file, we can either select and hit import, or we can double click any file, and that will open the create clip dialog. Essentially what this is asking us to do is to come up with a name and a place to store the link that will direct Mistica to the original footage. Remember from the media browser tutorial that the way Mistica works is it's not actually importing this material, it's simply providing a link to it, so the material stays in its original format and it's an original location. The benefit to that being that you don't have any unnecessary cross conversions that either cost you quality or waste time. Mistica by and large will try and decode files from their native formats on the fly at the point of use. The downside to that strategy is you have to be sure, of course, that your media is secure in those remote locations. For example, I was aware of a case where someone had done an autoconform from red movie files that the client had supplied on a USB drive. The next day when they came in to look at their project, they found they had no media, which had a lot to do with the fact the client took the USB drive home with them. Circumstances like that point to two things. Firstly, if your media is not in a permanent location, then you should move it to something that you know will be permanent and secure, for example your local storage. The other question that arises as well is one of bandwidth. Mystica will always try and play stuff in real time, but it can only play things in real time if the storage and the path to the storage is capable of providing the data fast enough. So if you have 4K DPX streams on a USB drive, that's not going to run in real time. So before embarking on a project, it's worth thinking about where you actually want to store your original footage. So anyway, back to importing. So I can simply say how I want to refer to this clip. Naturally, Mystica will give me the name of the clip, but I can call it anything I like. This isn't changing the name of the media, it's simply changing my reference to the media. So likewise, I can put this link in any folder I like, or create a new folder. And then I have a choice, given that it knows that it's a movie file, whether to link the media as interlaced or progressive. The only difference this makes is Mystica places a marker in the file as to whether it should be decoded as interlaced or progressive for certain effects and rendering. So I'm going to link as progressive, and straight away our clip appears on the timeline. So this clip is playing from its original location. We can always find its original location by going to Edit and Attributes, and you can see down here it'll say precisely where that file actually resides. And if we want to bring that back to our timeline, for example we've removed it, then under our media browser, rather than re-import it, we can simply go back to that link that we created. Mystica accepts hundreds of varieties of files as input. Some are more appropriate than others. Certainly with movie files, the long GOP formats tend to be not so ideal for editing, and some of the more domestic video cameras record in this format. So while Mystica will import those types of files, you might find the performance is better if they're pre-converted to something that isn't long GOP. Also, what Mystica recognizes as being possible to import is based on its extension name. So if you have a file that it appears Mystica won't import, and you'll know about that because this will be grey and nothing will appear in the source monitor. But if you feel that it should be able to import it, just check the extension name, make sure it's something sensible. Let's look at importing images instead. So if I go to my image sequences folder that I have here, I've got a folder full of EXR files. Now I can click anywhere in the sequence, and if I either press import or double click, it'll open a very similar dialog to we had a moment ago for importing movies, although I've got a couple of other options here. Everything else is the same, where I choose to place my link and what I want to call the link. But I have an extra option, which is to link single image only. Mystica has automatically recognized that this is part of a sequence because again it's looking at the ascending numbers. And note that I don't need to pick the first or last or any particular frame in the sequence in order to load a sequence. Mystica will always import the entire sequence that's made up of consecutive numbers. If you find you import an image sequence and the clip that it creates doesn't seem to include all of the frames in the folder, double check the numbers. You'll almost certainly find that there's a frame missing, and that's where Mystica would have ended its clip. Of course, if you pick a frame in the next continuous block of incremental frames, then Mystica would make another sequence out of that. So on this dialog, if I were to say link single image only, I'd get a single frame clip which included just this frame. On the other hand, if I picked linked as interlace sequence or as progressive sequence, it would create a single clip that took all of those frames into account. So let's do that. Link as progressive. So now on my timeline, I now have my EXR sequence ready to go. So as you can see, Mystica has no problem with the fact that this actually is probably an H.264 file and this is an EXR image sequence. To me as the operator, they're simply presented as media clips. but because Mistika has high dynamic range throughout, the full range of the EXR file is being decoded for me, ready for color grading and compositing. So far we've looked at how we import a single item at a time. There are occasions when we'll want to import entire bins, perhaps rushes from a camera shoot. So let's look at how we do that. So let's just find our way back. So under this folder red, I actually have something from a real life red shoot, and as you can see, it tends to build reasonably convoluted folder structures, in that I've had to go all the way down here before I've actually found the red file, which I can still click on and have a look through. So you can imagine that'd be quite arduous to go through each one of these and add them to the timeline one at a time. So that's why we have an import all movies here and a setup for that. Under setup, I can choose what attributes of the path ultimately create the link name. Remember, when we double clicked on a single entity to create a link, of course we could create our own name for it. But if we're importing all movies under a given directory, we don't actually know how many clips it's likely to find, so we need an automated way of creating a file name. So these are just instructions to Mistika as to how to create a file name, whether they are progressive or interlaced clips, and whether we want to keep the folder tree or not. So let's do this a couple of different ways so we can see how it works. Let's leave it on replicate the folder tree, and for the link name we'll just use the file name, nothing to do with the path. So now I can just pick a parent directory and go import all movies. It's done that pretty quickly, as you saw. So that's now, if we go to our media browser, we'll see that it's created a new directory, and under that directory will be a copy of what was under our day 6 directory. And finally at the bottom we'll find, as you can see, a link file that, as we specified, is exactly named as the red file. So that's now accessible to my timeline. Let's just delete that and import with some different settings. So to delete, here's the delete button here within media, and Mistika comes up with a safety check. If I hit OK now, nothing would be deleted, because I explicitly have to say I do want to delete those links, and I explicitly have to say I do want to delete those directories. Note that we are definitely only deleting the links, and the local directory we just created, we're definitely not deleting the original media. So that's cleared up. So let's just look at that again. So back to import and day 6, but let's change our setup. This time let's say I actually just want them all in one folder, because I don't really care how they were done before. But there are certain attributes within this path that are quite useful to me. For example, the real number actually could be quite useful. Well, path level 5 will be the real number, which we can see from just counting upwards. And actually, whether it's to the left or the right image would also be useful. So we'll have path level 4 as well, and then we'll have the file name. So now, with this selected, go import all movies again, and back to media. Now what we can see is, rather than a convoluted folder structure, instead it's automatically created some link names for me. It's kept the name of the folder that related to the reel, and the name of the folder that specified whether the left eye or the right eye, and then it's appended the file name and link. So that's a method of making our own file names that mean something to us as operators, whilst not in any way upsetting the original layout of the files. So if I wanted to import a section of those, I could simply shift click to get a selection and open to timeline, and there they all are ready to go. So that gives you an overview of the importing process. The key points being that Mistika doesn't copy the media to its local storage. Rather, it simply creates a reference to where the media actually resides. And those references are called link files, and those link files can be found then in your media browser. You can move those link files around anywhere you like in the media browser, because they are just your pointers to the ultimate footage. When you move those links around, you are not moving the final footage. The benefit of working this way is your original footage stays where you originally found it. You're not moving it around, so if perhaps your colleagues on different systems are also accessing the same footage, you're not upsetting them. But the thing to be aware of is wherever that footage is stored needs to be at a location that can serve those files fast enough to you to maintain your real-time performance. And they must be stored securely, so that, for example, if someone else turns off their computer, your timeline suddenly doesn't go dead because Mistika can no longer see the path to the files. If there's a risk of that, then the answer is simply to copy your original footage to your local storage before you start.